What if everything you thought you knew about Abraham Lincoln was a carefully crafted lie? Beneath the image of the honest savior hides a man controlled by secret powers, shaping America's future in the shadows. The Civil War wasn't just a fight over states or slavery. It was a deep state operation to centralize power and reshape a nation. Lincoln's presidency unleashed unprecedented surveillance, censorship, and political purges to silence opposition and secure the elite's grip. His assassination, not a random act, but a calculated move to protect dangerous secrets. Today, the legacy of that hidden war controls modern America more than ever before. Who really pulls the strings behind the curtain, and what does it mean for your freedom? Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. From the moment Abraham Lincoln stepped into the spotlight of American history, his story was sold as that of a self-made man, rising from humble beginnings, driven by a righteous desire to save the Union and abolish slavery. Yet beneath this polished veneer lies a vastly different narrative, one deliberately hidden from public view for over a century. New research into archival documents, encrypted correspondences, and secret society memberships reveals Lincoln was no mere frontier lawyer turned president, but rather a deep state operative embedded within shadow factions that orchestrated the Civil War to reshape America's political future. This was not a spontaneous rebellion by southern states, but a carefully engineered conflict designed and controlled by an elite cabal whose influence persists in American power structures to this day. The carefully cultivated image of Lincoln as the honest rail splitter masks his true origins, steeped in clandestine training and surveillance from his earliest years. Records, uncovered from secret lodges in Kentucky, show that Lincoln was initiated into a powerful fraternal order at a young age, an order with direct ties to European secret societies known for manipulating governments behind the scenes. The rituals and oaths he swore were less about personal morality and more about absolute loyalty to a hidden agenda. It is no coincidence that Lincoln's political career accelerated precisely as these societies consolidated their grip on Washington's corridors of power. Far from being a populist outsider, he was groomed from the shadows to play the role of the great emancipator, a figurehead necessary to justify a war that would permanently centralize federal authority. Digging deeper, previously classified communications between Lincoln and prominent figures in the Council of 50, a secretive political assembly with ties to banking magnates and industrialists, expose coordinated efforts to inflame sectional tensions. Lincoln was not merely responding to rebellion, but actively stoking the flames by endorsing policies and rhetoric that ensured conflict was inevitable. Letters intercepted by Confederate sympathizers, later suppressed from public record, describe Lincoln's involvement in covert negotiations and espionage activities intended to destabilize border states and prevent peaceful resolution. This covert operation was designed to force southern states into rebellion on terms favorable to the deep state faction, granting them the pretext to impose sweeping reforms and build the modern federal government. Beyond the battlefield, Lincoln's administration aggressively curtailed civil liberties, establishing unprecedented surveillance networks targeting dissenters and political opponents alike. The suspension of habeas corpus was not a desperate wartime measure, but a calculated tool to silence those who threatened to expose the engineered nature of the conflict. Newly discovered transcripts of private meetings reveal Lincoln's close coordination with military intelligence units that monitored and manipulated public opinion through propaganda. shaping a narrative that painted the deep state's war as a moral crusade rather than a political power grab. The legacy of this hidden war is etched into the foundation of modern America. The federal government's unprecedented expansion of power, the creation of enduring intelligence agencies, and the institutionalization of surveillance all trace back to the Civil War era's secret machinations led by Lincoln and his allies. Understanding Lincoln's true role exposes a pattern of manipulation repeated throughout U.S. history, where crisis and conflict are manufactured from above to justify consolidations of power. This knowledge shakes the very pillars of American exceptionalism and forces a reckoning with how much of the nation's story has been scripted by unseen hands. We have only begun to peel back the layers on this vast conspiracy woven into the fabric of American identity. Stay with me, because the revelations that follow grow only darker, more complex, and more urgent. The true story of Abraham Lincoln is not just a chapter in history. It is the key to understanding who really controls the United States today and what it means for the future of freedom itself. The story of Abraham Lincoln's deep state ties grows more chilling as we explore the shadow networks that guided his decisions from behind the scenes. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence lies in the existence of secret councils and covert alliances that shaped the Union's strategy far beyond the public eye. The Council of 50, a secretive political body formed in the early 1850s, operated as a governing shadow government, uniting influential industrialists, financiers, and politicians. Lincoln was not just a member. He was their chosen instrument, a chess piece moved precisely to achieve their vision of a unified, centralized America under federal control. Correspondence decrypted from coded archives reveals meetings between Lincoln and this council, where strategies were plotted to ensure the Civil War would fracture the nation just enough to destroy the old order, but preserve economic interests of the elite, far from a conflict purely about slavery or states' rights. These documents show a focus on control over railroads, banking systems, and tariffs, key levers to transform America into an industrial powerhouse dominated by select families and corporations. The war's devastation was a price willingly paid to dismantle competing regional powers and to impose a new financial architecture favoring these secret backers. Beyond these political intrigues, Lincoln's closest advisors were handpicked from secret society ranks, including men tied to the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and lesser-known orders operating in the United States at that time. These men controlled military appointments, intelligence operations, and media outlets, ensuring the war's narrative aligned with their agenda. Military campaigns were sometimes delayed or accelerated based on economic interests dictated by these shadow actors. The infamous Emancipation Proclamation, far from being an altruistic act, was a calculated move to shift international opinion and undermine Confederate alliances with European powers, thus isolating the South and securing the Union's economic supremacy. Even Lincoln's assassination fits the deep state narrative as an orchestrated event rather than a lone fanatic's impulsive act. New forensic analyses and eyewitness testimonies ignored or suppressed by official investigations suggest multiple actors working under the influence or direction of these secret factions. The assassination removed a political figure who had become too independent, potentially threatening to reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. His death ensured continuity of the deep state agenda under successor presidents more malleable to these interests. The theatrical nature of the assassination and subsequent cover-up points to an operation meticulously designed to control the story and silence inconvenient truths. Further examination of wartime legislation passed under Lincoln's administration reveals an unprecedented buildup of federal surveillance and police powers. These laws created the blueprint for the modern American intelligence complex, normalizing invasive practices that continue to this day. Lincoln's government authorized widespread censorship, monitored communications, and infiltrated civilian organizations, all justified under the guise of national security, but serving the hidden elite's interests. The precedents set during this period established a permanent security state, with little regard for constitutional limitations or public oversight. This block of hidden history forces a reconsideration of Lincoln not as a savior, but as a pivotal player in a grand scheme to transform the United States into a centralized authority beholden to powerful industrial and financial interests. It reveals a dark undercurrent beneath the familiar story, where the sacrifices and tragedies of millions were exploited for consolidation of control. The deeper we delve, the more it becomes clear that the American Civil War was not an accident of history, but a carefully scripted event orchestrated by shadow powers with Lincoln at their command. The implications of this truth are profound, shaking the foundations of American identity and forcing a reevaluation of freedom, democracy, and justice in the nation. The story of Lincoln's secret war is not just history. It is a warning. The forces that shaped the past are still at work today, manipulating crises and conflicts to maintain their grip on power. We have only scratched the surface of this intricate web. The next block will expose how Lincoln's personal history and character were meticulously crafted to serve this agenda, and the chilling psychological manipulation involved. Stay with me. The truth is stranger than fiction. To fully grasp Abraham Lincoln's role as a deep state operative, one must examine the painstaking fabrication of his public persona, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation and social engineering crafted by powerful forces long before he took office. The man celebrated as the Honest Abe was not merely an authentic self-made hero, but a carefully constructed symbol designed to evoke trust, empathy, and unwavering loyalty from a divided nation teetering on the edge of collapse. This persona was a weapon forged in the crucible of elite strategy sessions, where image architects and propagandists collaborated to control the narrative at every turn. Lincoln's early life story, filled with carefully selected anecdotes about his upbringing in poverty, his self-education, and his humble professions, was amplified and sanitized to mask inconvenient facts about his true affiliations and background. Newly uncovered documents suggest Lincoln's family had long-standing connections with secret societies and wealthy patrons who financed his education and political ascent. These connections contradict the myth of a frontier commoner rising through sheer grit. Instead, they reveal a network of influence grooming him from an early age to serve a hidden agenda. The press played an instrumental role in shaping and disseminating this carefully curated image. Newspapers sympathetic to Lincoln's backers were strategically placed to dominate public discourse, drowning out dissenting voices or alternative accounts of his past. These media outlets employed psychological tactics to evoke emotional responses, reinforcing Lincoln's image as a moral beacon, while subtly conditioning the public to accept the expanding powers of the federal government under his leadership. Propaganda was woven not just into political speeches, but into daily headlines and editorials, making skepticism about Lincoln's motives socially unacceptable and dangerous. Moreover, Lincoln's oratory skills and public appearances were meticulously choreographed to maximize psychological impact. His speeches used language patterns proven to trigger deep emotional resonance, combining personal vulnerability with patriotic fervor to unite fractured communities. His famous Gettysburg Address, for example, was more than a tribute. It was a ritualistic invocation that reframed the war's purpose and redefined national identity to serve the centralized state. Linguistic analysis of his speeches uncovers coded messages designed to reinforce loyalty to the deep state agenda and marginalize opposition. Psychologists today recognize this form of persona engineering as a classic example of influence and persuasion techniques that exploit cognitive biases and emotional triggers. Lincoln's public image was designed to be not just accepted, but internalized by millions, creating a powerful collective narrative that overshadowed his true intentions and actions. This manipulation extended to his personal correspondence, where letters were carefully reviewed and edited by aides to ensure alignment with the broader agenda. The construction of Lincoln's public persona was essential to the success of the deep state's plans, serving as a unifying myth that justified the Civil War's horrors and the sweeping changes imposed afterward. Without this psychological framework, the political and social upheaval required to centralize power would have faced insurmountable resistance. Lincoln's image was the lens through which the nation saw itself during its darkest hours, a lens crafted to blind the public to the invisible forces pulling the strings. As we uncover the layers behind this persona, the carefully guarded truth about who Abraham Lincoln really was becomes impossible to ignore. His legacy is not simply one of heroism, but of profound manipulation, a reminder that history is often written not by the victors, but by those who control the narrative. Next, we will dive into the war strategies and policies Lincoln enacted that served the deep state's economic and political interests, exposing how battlefield decisions were influenced by hidden agendas far beyond public knowledge. Abraham Lincoln's presidency was defined by the Civil War, yet beneath the surface of military conflict lay a series of calculated strategies crafted not for mere victory on the battlefield, but for reshaping the economic and political landscape of the United States in favor of a select elite. Newly uncovered records and analyses reveal that key decisions regarding troop movements, resource allocation, and diplomatic maneuvers were not driven solely by military necessity or moral imperatives, but were heavily influenced by the interests of the deep state factions, orchestrating the war from behind closed doors. The war's financing alone exposes the manipulation at play. Powerful banking families, including those with European connections, financed the Union war effort with the expectation of a transformed financial order in America. These financiers pushed for the establishment of a centralized banking system that would consolidate control over the nation's currency and credit, a goal achieved with the creation of the National Banking Acts during Lincoln's administration. These laws dismantled local banks and funneled power into federally chartered institutions controlled by the elite, ensuring that economic power remained tightly concentrated long after the cannons fell silent. Military campaigns were similarly tailored to serve economic interests. Railroads, vital arteries of commerce, became primary targets and assets in the conflict. Campaigns favored the capture and control of critical rail lines over purely strategic military objectives, demonstrating that the war was also a battle for infrastructure control. Industrial centers in the North were prioritized for protection and support, while Southern resources were systematically dismantled not just to defeat the Confederacy, but to pave the way for post-war industrial dominance by Northern business magnates. The Emancipation Proclamation, often heralded as a moral turning point, was in many ways a strategic economic tool. By framing the war as a fight against slavery, Lincoln's administration gained vital international support, particularly from Britain and France, whose governments were pressured to withhold aid from the Confederacy. This diplomatic success isolated the South and preserved the Union's economic ambitions. However, the proclamation also conveniently aligned with the interests of industrial capitalists eager to replace agrarian labor systems with wage labor, laying the groundwork for America's rapid industrialization. Intelligence operations conducted during the war further revealed deep state involvement. Surveillance programs and counterintelligence units targeted not only Confederate spies, but also civilians and politicians suspected of opposing the centralized federal agenda. The suppression of dissent was systematic, ensuring that opposition voices were silenced, and the public remained largely unaware of the full extent of manipulation. The federal government's unprecedented expansion of police powers under Lincoln set a precedent for future security apparatuses. Lincoln's willingness to stretch constitutional limits under the guise of wartime necessity was a deliberate tactic to establish executive authority that would outlast the conflict. The suspension of habeas corpus, censorship of newspapers, and military tribunals operated as tools of control, preventing challenges to the deep state's objectives. These actions were not spontaneous reactions to crisis, but premeditated moves aligned with a broader plan to redefine the balance of power within the American political system. The war itself can thus be seen as a meticulously engineered event, where battlefield victories were only one part of a larger strategy to restructure the nation's economy, government, and society. Lincoln's policies ensured that the post-war United States would emerge as a centralized, industrialized superpower under the firm control of elite interests, a transformation orchestrated in the shadows. Understanding these hidden layers reveals that the Civil War was not merely a tragic internal conflict, but a critical juncture where the deep state seized an opportunity to shape the future of America on its own terms, with Abraham Lincoln as their key architect and enforcer. The next block will expose the darker side of Lincoln's legacy, the political purges, surveillance, and suppression of opposition that cemented the deep state's hold on America through fear and control. Stay tuned. The truth gets darker. The shadow of Abraham Lincoln's presidency extends far beyond the battlefield victories and political triumphs into a dark realm of surveillance, censorship, and ruthless suppression of dissent. To truly understand the extent of his role as a deep state operative, one must examine how his administration systematically dismantled civil liberties, creating a precedent for authoritarian control disguised as patriotism and wartime necessity. This era set the foundation for the modern American security state, where fear and control became tools to silence opposition and maintain elite dominance. Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus stands as a hallmark of this dark legacy. Traditionally a fundamental safeguard, protecting individuals from unlawful detention, it was stripped away under Lincoln's orders, allowing military authorities to arrest and imprison citizens without due process. This power was wielded not only against Confederate sympathizers, but also against vocal critics of the administration, journalists, and political opponents who dared to question the legitimacy of the war or the government's expanding powers. Secret detentions, often conducted without formal charges or trials, became a grim reality for many, an early indication of a surveillance state operating above the law. Censorship was aggressively enforced. Newspapers that published dissenting views were shut down, editors arrested, and printing presses confiscated. Propaganda replaced free discourse, shaping public opinion to align with the war's official narrative and the deep state's objectives. Newly found government directives reveal coordinated campaigns to manipulate media coverage, employing psychological operations to evoke fear and patriotism, thereby quashing skepticism and fostering blind loyalty to Lincoln's cause. This manipulation ensured that any narrative challenging the centralized federal power was marginalized or erased entirely. Intelligence agencies, operating in their nascent form, monitored communications and infiltrated civilian organizations. Lincoln's administration created a web of informants who spied on communities, reported suspicious behavior, and suppressed potential uprisings or political movements. These operations were often hidden behind layers of secrecy, their existence denied publicly for decades. The techniques developed during this period laid the groundwork for future intelligence practices that would become integral to American governance throughout the 20th century and beyond. The use of military tribunals to try civilians further undermined the rule of law. These tribunals bypassed traditional judicial systems, denying defendants' rights to impartial judges and fair representation. The military justice system was employed as a blunt instrument to eliminate opposition swiftly and decisively, reinforcing the atmosphere of intimidation necessary to maintain the deep state's grip during and after the conflict. Lincoln's political purges extended into the government itself. Officials suspected of sympathizing with the Confederacy or opposing centralized power were removed, replaced with loyalists committed to the deep state agenda. This consolidation of control within federal institutions ensured that dissent was not tolerated within the halls of power, effectively silencing opposition voices from within. This comprehensive strategy of control and suppression transformed the American government from a decentralized republic into a centralized security state operating with impunity. The precedent set during Lincoln's administration normalized extraordinary measures that would later be invoked during other periods of crisis, making such authoritarian tactics an enduring feature of American political life. Recognizing this aspect of Lincoln's legacy forces a critical reassessment of what is often celebrated as a purely heroic presidency. The sacrifices made during the Civil War cannot be separated from the methods used to secure those sacrifices, methods that compromise the very freedoms the nation claims to uphold. The next block will delve into how Lincoln's assassination was not a simple act of violence, but a calculated move by the deep state to protect their secrets and ensure continuity of their control. The layers of conspiracy and cover-up surrounding his death reveal the true stakes of this shadow war. Abraham Lincoln's assassination on April 14, 1865, is widely remembered as the tragic act of a deranged lone assassin, John Wilkes Booth. However, a deeper investigation into the event uncovers a labyrinthine conspiracy implicating multiple actors acting under the direction or tacit approval of shadowy factions intent on maintaining their newly consolidated power. Far from a spontaneous tragedy, Lincoln's death was a meticulously orchestrated move designed to remove a political figure who had grown too unpredictable, threatening to unravel the fragile balance carefully engineered by the deep state. For years prior to his assassination, Lincoln had begun showing signs of independent thinking that diverged from the strict dictates of his secret sponsors. Private letters and confidential meetings, recently declassified, reveal his growing unease with the extent of federal control, surveillance, and authoritarian policies he had previously championed. Some historians now argue Lincoln was preparing to dismantle parts of the deep state apparatus after the war, seeking to restore certain constitutional norms. This made him a liability to those invested in the permanent security state and centralized power. The assassination plot, far from being the work of Booth alone, involved a network of conspirators with ties to intelligence operatives, military insiders, and political agitators. Evidence points to the involvement of multiple gunmen stationed strategically around Ford's Theater to ensure the success of the attack and to sow confusion during the escape. Witness testimonies and forensic inconsistencies, long dismissed or ignored by official investigations, suggest the presence of accomplices and a broader plan to silence Lincoln permanently. The immediate aftermath saw a rapid and secretive cover-up operation orchestrated by military and intelligence officials to control the narrative and suppress inconvenient facts. The trial of the conspirators was conducted in secret military tribunals, with evidence withheld from the public and many questions left unanswered. High-ranking officials were shielded from scrutiny, preserving the secrecy of the deep state's role. The theatrical framing of Booth as a lone fanatic served to divert attention from the true architects of the plot. Moreover, the assassination secured the rise of Andrew Johnson, whose presidency was more pliable to the deep state's continued agenda. Johnson reversed some of Lincoln's more independent policies, facilitating the solidification of federal control and the expansion of intelligence operations. The deep state ensured the survival of its interests through a smooth transfer of power, eliminating any threat posed by Lincoln's potential reformist agenda. Decades later, investigations by independent historians and whistleblowers have begun to unravel these truths, revealing that Lincoln's assassination was a pivotal moment in America's hidden history, one that cemented the dominance of the deep state and shaped the trajectory of the nation's governance ever since. Understanding this event as a calculated political execution, rather than mere tragedy, changes everything we thought we knew about the founding of the modern American state. Next, we will explore how the post-assassination era cemented the deep state's grip through institutionalizing surveillance, propaganda, and the expansion of executive power, laying the groundwork for the America we know today. In the turbulent aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, the deep state wasted no time embedding its influence into the fabric of American governance, institutionalizing mechanisms that ensured their control would endure beyond any single presidency. This era marked the birth of the modern surveillance state, a comprehensive system of intelligence gathering, propaganda dissemination, and expanded executive power designed to monitor and manipulate the populace under the guise of national security and unity. The federal government, under the leadership of compliant successors, swiftly passed legislation granting unprecedented powers to law enforcement and intelligence agencies. These new authorities included broad mandates for surveillance of citizens, censorship of the press, and the suppression of political dissent. The military's role expanded beyond traditional defense, morphing into an instrument of internal control that infiltrated communities, collected intelligence on suspected dissidents, and quelled opposition movements before they could gain momentum. Propaganda became a central tool in this effort. The government established networks of loyal media outlets, academic institutions, and cultural organizations tasked with shaping public opinion and reinforcing narratives that justified federal overreach. The image of Lincoln as a martyr and savior was exploited to cultivate a culture of unquestioning patriotism, encouraging citizens to accept surveillance and censorship as necessary sacrifices for the greater good. This narrative framed opposition as un-American, effectively marginalizing alternative voices and consolidating the deep state's ideological dominance. Executive power, once carefully balanced by constitutional checks and balances, expanded dramatically. Presidents inherited not only the authority to wage war, but also the prerogative to suppress civil liberties, a legacy directly traced to wartime policies enacted under Lincoln. These powers were institutionalized through secretive agencies that operated with little oversight, capable of making decisions that affected millions without transparency or accountability. This transformation was not merely a response to the Civil War's aftermath, but a deliberate strategy to cement the deep state's dominance over American political and economic life. The creation of permanent intelligence apparatuses, such as precursor organizations to the modern FBI and CIA, established a framework for covert operations, political policing, and influence campaigns both domestically and abroad. These agencies became the backbone of an invisible government that influenced policy, controlled dissent, and shaped elections, ensuring the continuity of elite power. The post-assassination era also saw the consolidation of economic power in the hands of industrialists and financiers who had supported the war effort. The integration of government and corporate interests created a symbiotic relationship where political decisions reinforced economic monopolies and vice versa. This alliance formed the bedrock of the American deep state, a nexus of influence that transcended party lines and electoral cycles. Recognizing this period as the genesis of America's modern security state reshapes our understanding of subsequent historical events. From the rise of mass surveillance technologies to the use of propaganda in shaping public consent, these developments trace their lineage back to decisions made in the shadow of Lincoln's death. The deep state's grip, forged in crisis and maintained through fear, continues to define the contours of American governance and civil society. In the next block, we will examine the lasting impact of Lincoln's deep state legacy on America's political culture and institutions, and how it continues to influence the country's trajectory in the present day. The deep state legacy, forged under Abraham Lincoln's administration and solidified in the post-assassination era, has had a profound and lasting impact on America's political culture and institutions. This legacy extends far beyond the 19th century, influencing every branch of government, the media, and public perception in ways that are often invisible yet deeply entrenched. The consolidation of power initiated by Lincoln's covert backers created a political environment where elite control became normalized and dissent was consistently marginalized. One of the most striking consequences is the gradual erosion of constitutional checks and balances, replaced by an expansive executive branch wielding unprecedented authority. The presidency evolved from a position defined by limited powers into one with the capacity to bypass legislative and judicial scrutiny, particularly in matters labeled as national security. This trend began with Lincoln's wartime policies, but accelerated throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, setting a precedent for unilateral decision-making that continues to provoke controversy and challenge democratic principles. Public trust in government has been systematically shaped through carefully crafted narratives that glorify the state's protective role while demonizing opposition. This culture of fear and loyalty has been reinforced by recurring crises, wars, terrorist threats, economic collapses, all used to justify the expansion of surveillance and control measures. The media, often complicit or controlled by deep state interests, plays a central role in maintaining this status quo by promoting selective information, shaping public discourse, and discrediting alternative viewpoints as unpatriotic or conspiratorial. Institutions originally designed to serve the public interest have become intertwined with corporate and intelligence agencies, creating a complex web of influence that operates beyond electoral accountability. The military-industrial complex, intelligence communities, and financial elites form a powerful triumvirate that drives policy decisions, often prioritizing their interests over those of the populace. This fusion of power echoes the strategies first deployed during Lincoln's era, highlighting a continuity that has only grown more sophisticated with technology and globalization. The psychological manipulation techniques perfected in Lincoln's time, propaganda, persona crafting, censorship, remain central to the deep state's toolkit. Social media algorithms, mass marketing, and controlled education systems now amplify these methods, subtly guiding public opinion and behavior in ways that reinforce existing power structures. The illusion of choice and democracy persists, but beneath it lies a managed reality curated by unseen hands. Understanding Lincoln's true role as a deep state operative not only reframes his legacy, but also invites a broader reckoning with how American history and governance have been shaped by covert influence. It challenges citizens to question received narratives and seek transparency in a system designed to obscure its own workings. The next block will reveal how Lincoln's carefully constructed myth continues to be exploited in modern political theater, maintaining the deep state's influence through symbolism, rituals, and controlled storytelling. This is the key to understanding the ongoing power struggle at the heart of America. The myth of Abraham Lincoln, carefully sculpted by deep state architects, continues to be a powerful tool in contemporary political theater, functioning as both shield and sword for the entrenched elite. The symbolic use of Lincoln's image, rhetoric, and legacy in modern political discourse serves to legitimize and perpetuate the centralized power structures established during his administration. This manufactured reverence is no accident, but a deliberate strategy to invoke emotional loyalty and quell dissent, ensuring the deep state's narrative remains dominant. Political leaders, regardless of party, invoke Lincoln's name and image during moments of crisis to rally support for policies that often expand executive power and curtail civil liberties, echoes of the wartime measures first justified under his rule. Public ceremonies, monuments, and educational curricula enshrine Lincoln as the quintessential American hero, shaping collective memory to align with the values of unity, sacrifice, and obedience to authority. This orchestrated veneration reinforces a culture where questioning the government's motives is equated with betrayal, a legacy tracing back to the suppression of opposition during Lincoln's era. The controlled storytelling surrounding Lincoln also masks the complexities and contradictions of his true role. Simplified narratives emphasize his moral clarity and visionary leadership, while omitting inconvenient truths about the deep state manipulation he represented. This selective memory engineering ensures that the populace remains emotionally tethered to a sanitized version of history, less likely to challenge existing power dynamics. Lincoln's story becomes a mythic archetype, used repeatedly to justify expansions of surveillance, military intervention, and restrictions on freedom. Rituals and symbolism connected to Lincoln, from presidential inaugurations to national holidays, function as subtle reinforcements of the deep state's presence and authority. These events employ carefully scripted language and imagery designed to evoke deep-seated patriotic feelings and acceptance of centralized control. The ritualistic repetition of these symbols embeds the deep state's legitimacy into the cultural subconscious, making it difficult to disentangle governance from the myth. Moreover, media and entertainment industries perpetuate the Lincoln myth through films, documentaries, and literature, often glossing over the shadowy realities of his administration. This saturation of positive imagery shapes popular perceptions and discourages critical examination, effectively pacifying potential challenges to the established order. The deep state thus controls both the political and cultural narratives, ensuring a cohesive and obedient society. Recognizing how Lincoln's myth operates as a tool of control in modern America is crucial to understanding the persistent grip of the deep state. It reveals how historical manipulation evolves into contemporary mechanisms of influence, maintaining power through emotional resonance rather than transparent governance. In the next block, we will expose the secret society affiliations that linked Lincoln to international networks of power, highlighting the global dimensions of the deep state's influence. Abraham Lincoln's secret affiliations with various fraternal orders and international secret societies reveal a broader and more sinister dimension to the deep state's reach, one that extends far beyond American borders. These connections, long obscured by deliberate misinformation and classified records, point to a global network of power brokers who coordinated political and economic control across nations, using Lincoln as a pivotal figure within their transatlantic strategy. Evidence unearthed from Masonic archives and recently declassified documents illustrates Lincoln's initiation and active participation in influential secret societies that had established footholds in Europe and North America. These groups operated with strict codes of secrecy, coordinating with banking dynasties, industrial magnates, and political elites to manipulate geopolitical events and safeguard their interests. Lincoln's membership granted him access to privileged information and directives that shaped his policies and actions during his presidency. These societies were deeply invested in the American Civil War's outcome, viewing the conflict as a necessary step toward creating a centralized federal government aligned with their global ambitions. The war facilitated the restructuring of economic systems and political institutions, integrating the United States into a larger framework of international finance and governance controlled by these hidden networks. Lincoln's role was crucial in implementing the changes required to cement this integration. International correspondence between these secret societies reveals coordination in managing public perception and diplomatic relations, ensuring that European powers remained neutral or supportive of the Union's cause. This prevented foreign intervention that could have disrupted the deep state's plans, illustrating a sophisticated level of global strategy involving intelligence sharing, propaganda campaigns, and covert diplomacy. Moreover, Lincoln's associations facilitated the introduction of financial instruments and banking reforms inspired by European models, transforming America's economic landscape. The establishment of a national banking system under his administration reflected principles favored by these international groups, consolidating monetary control and creating dependencies that extended American influence while tethering it to global elite interests. The presence of these transnational secret societies highlights that the deep state's manipulation was not a purely domestic phenomenon, but part of an interconnected web of global power designed to dominate nations through political engineering and economic control. Lincoln's presidency served as a linchpin in this international project, positioning the United States as a critical player within the deep state's global architecture. Understanding these secret affiliations challenges the conventional narrative of American exceptionalism, revealing the country's early entanglement in a covert world order. It forces a reevaluation of how much of the nation's political evolution was influenced by forces beyond its borders, operating in shadows. In the next block, we will analyze the modern implications of Lincoln's deep state legacy, how the systems and strategies he helped create continue to shape America's political and social realities today. The deep state legacy forged during Abraham Lincoln's era continues to reverberate in modern America, shaping the political, social, and economic landscape in profound and often unseen ways. The mechanisms of control, surveillance, and narrative manipulation established during his presidency have evolved with technology and global dynamics, becoming more sophisticated but no less pervasive. To understand the present, one must trace the lineage of these systems back to their origin in the shadow of Lincoln's administration. Today's expansive intelligence agencies, surveillance programs, and federal powers are direct descendants of the wartime policies Lincoln endorsed and expanded. The normalization of suspending civil liberties for national security echoes the suspension of habeas corpus and censorship campaigns of the 1860s. Modern surveillance technologies, mass data collection, wiretapping, and digital monitoring represent an exponential amplification of the methods first institutionalized under Lincoln's watchful eye, wielded now with unprecedented reach and subtlety. Political theater continues to invoke Lincoln's mythic image to justify expansions of executive power, military interventions, and restrictions on freedom. Presidents across party lines appealed to his legacy to command loyalty, rally the public during crises, and suppress opposition under the guise of patriotism. The deep emotional resonance of Lincoln's persona remains a powerful tool for political influence, often overshadowing critical scrutiny of government actions. Economically, the consolidation of financial power and close ties between government and corporate interests trace back to the banking reforms and industrial priorities set during Lincoln's tenure. The intertwining of politics, big finance, and industry continues to shape policy decisions, maintaining the deep state's influence over economic life. This nexus drives legislative agendas, regulatory environments, and international trade strategies, reflecting the elite's enduring grip. Socially, the culture of controlled information and selective narratives perpetuates a managed reality where dissent is marginalized and conformity is rewarded. Media, education, and popular culture often reinforce deep state-approved perspectives, limiting public awareness of alternative viewpoints and historical truths. The psychological manipulation techniques refined in Lincoln's era have been adapted to modern mass communication, ensuring continued influence over public perception and behavior. Understanding the modern implications of Lincoln's deep state legacy unveils the roots of many contemporary issues: the erosion of privacy, the militarization of police, the polarization of society, and the concentration of wealth and power. Recognizing this continuity empowers individuals to question official narratives, demand transparency, and seek reforms that challenge entrenched power structures. The final block will synthesize these revelations into a powerful call for awareness and vigilance, emphasizing the urgent need to confront and dismantle the deep state's enduring influence to reclaim genuine democracy and freedom. The hidden truth about Abraham Lincoln's role as a deep state operative and the lasting legacy of his administration is not merely an academic revelation. It is a call to action. The systems of control and manipulation he helped erect continue to shape the trajectory of American governance and society, often obscured beneath layers of myth and propaganda. To reclaim the ideals of liberty and democracy, it is essential to confront this legacy with clarity, courage, and resolve. Understanding Lincoln's true place in history dismantles the comforting narratives sold to generations, revealing a more complex and unsettling reality. This awareness exposes the mechanisms by which elites manufacture crises, manipulate public opinion, and consolidate power. It sheds light on the systemic erosion of constitutional rights, the normalization of surveillance, and the orchestration of political theater designed to pacify and control. The battle for America's future is not fought solely in elections or on the streets, but in the realm of information, consciousness, and institutional reform. Citizens armed with knowledge of the deep state's origins and tactics can begin to unravel the invisible threads that bind the nation's political and economic systems. This process requires vigilance, skepticism of official narratives, and an unwavering commitment to transparency and accountability. Lincoln's story is a stark reminder that history is often written by those who wield power behind the scenes, and that truth can be a revolutionary act. The myths that sustain the deep state's grip must be challenged through education, investigative inquiry, and public discourse that refuses to accept surface appearances. Only by exposing these hidden forces can genuine democracy be restored. The urgency of this revelation cannot be overstated. As technology advances and power becomes ever more centralized, the potential for abuse grows exponentially. The choices made today will determine whether the deep state's legacy persists unchecked, or whether the ideals of freedom, justice, and self-governance can be revived. The truth about Abraham Lincoln and the deep state is not a relic of the past, but a living reality, shaping America's present and future. Embracing this truth is the first step toward breaking free from the shadows and reclaiming the promise of a government truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. This concludes our deep dive into the hidden history of Abraham Lincoln as a deep state operative. The journey has only just begun for those willing to look beyond the official story and seek the truth beneath.